Alright guys, if you haven't heard of the Poco F1, it is the cheapest smartphone in the world to have the top tier Snapdragon 845 chip inside of it. So with that in mind, you would think they must have sacrificed big time on the camera. Well, thankfully, as you can probably tell from the footage yourself, that doesn't seem to be the case. So here we've got some front camera footage while I'm just sort of walking around. They all max out at 1080p, and because I'm just walking around, it gives you a pretty good idea of the stabilization as well. Each phone also has a different microphone setup, so let me know which one you think the audio sounds better on. Alright, moving over to the rear cameras, all three phones can shoot at 4K resolution. The OnePlus 6 has the advantage of being able to shoot 4K resolution at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, but for the sake of this comparison, we're going to stick to 30 on all three phones. And just before we carry on, I do want to give a quick shout out to LastPass for being the sponsor of this video. So you might have noticed on that past clip that the Poco F1 has the most saturated colours. And I mentioned this in my full review, but colours almost have a slight bloom to them, almost an over-exaggeration. It's up to you whether or not you like it, but my personal preference is I kind of wish it was toned down a little bit. You'll notice throughout this test consistently that the Mi A2 has the darkest image of the three, with the OnePlus 6 supporting the brightest. The Poco F1 sits somewhere in between the two, and it's a nice balance. I think the colours look rich and detailed, but in some cases can get a little much. Having said that, looking at the HDR capabilities, something that we know the OnePlus 6 is already very good at, the Poco F1 is right on its heels. If you look at the sky here, whilst the Mi A2 has lost big chunks of detail, the Poco F1 and the OnePlus 6 have pretty much retained all of it. Compared to both Xiaomi phones, the OnePlus 6's stabilization is on an entirely different level. This is at 4K resolution, and of course while the OnePlus 6 is the most expensive phone, you'd expect it to be the best, stabilization is really an area where you can tell the difference. The same is true for 1080p video, although the difference isn't as stark, because the Poco F1 and Xiaomi Mi A2, they do have electronic image stabilization which kicks in at this resolution. All three phones have similar slow motion capabilities, but Xiaomi's Mi A2 is noticeably a little bit behind. Its processing power is close to half of the other two devices, and so even though it can keep parity in terms of resolution, the actual noise you're getting per frame is higher. It's easy to forget though that the Mi A2 is a very affordable phone. It is half the price of the already great value OnePlus 6. When it comes to autofocusing, there was quite a clear, consistent trend here. The Poco F1 on the far left was the fastest on average to autofocus from a far subject to a close subject. The Mi A2 is the slowest, and every now and again would just fail to recognize an object in front of it. The OnePlus 6 was almost as fast as the Poco F1, but does have the advantage here of being able to make that transition between these two focus points much smoother, whereas the Poco F1 was a little jerky. As the light starts to fall, I'd say the Poco F1 does the best job of representing what the scene was actually like. Xiaomi's Mi A2 is a little bit too dark, and you can't clearly see what's happening in the less well-lit areas. The OnePlus 6 has gone the other way. It's actually recorded a scene that's brighter than what I was actually looking at, which in a way is a blessing. Generally more light when it comes to photography and videos is something you can't complain about. But I would say when it comes to photos, especially ones in very low light, OnePlus's insistence on creating bright images can come to its detriment. For example, compare the grain you see on the OnePlus 6 here compared to the Poco F1 or even the Mi A2. In a lot of ways, photography carries on the same trends we've seen from video. The OnePlus 6 has the brightest images, Mi A2 the darkest, and the Poco F1 sits neatly in the middle. It's not a case for 100% of the photos, but generally I do prefer the output from the Poco phone, which is very impressive considering that's about €300 and the OnePlus 6 would start at about 500. OnePlus is capturing most of the same details, and at its core that's what matters most, but if we're talking straight out of the camera which photos look the best, then I would say the processing is better on the F1. Out of the three phones, the Poco actually has the largest primary sensor, which basically allows it to process more light, and because it has a lower megapixel count than the 16 megapixel on the OnePlus 6, it means that each pixel you do have is likely to have less noise in it, but that might come back to haunt it when we do some close-up shots and take a look at resolution. Portrait mode. All three phones have really good portrait mode. The Mi A2, especially for its entry-level price, I was really impressed by. But that's not to say that the Poco F1 isn't even better than that, because I would say it is. Taking a look at my ear on the left hand side, both the F1 and the OnePlus 6 have managed to keep a really defined edge. With the Xiaomi Mi A2 it kind of blends into the background a little bit, which is normal, but it just means that it is outperformed in this scenario. If we now dropped this image with sort of middling lighting and crop into these pictures, you'll notice a couple of things. Xiaomi's Mi A2 has the most noise compared to the other two, but at the same time is the most sharpened. You might think that because the OnePlus 6 has the largest aperture, it can let the most light in and should have a consistent lead in low light performance, but as you can tell, that's just not what happens. The selfie camera on the Poco F1 is one of the phone's key highlights. As you can tell, it manages to expose your face properly, just like the other two phones, whilst also keeping that background from getting washed out. If we crop into these though, you'll notice that the OnePlus 6, by not even a close margin, has the most detailed selfies. Although you'll have to decide for yourself if that's important to you. Most people, when they take selfies, they're not going to be zooming into them. When the light starts to fall though, I would say the OnePlus 6 has a consistently better overall image. If you look at my beard, it's sharper on that phone, and also, whilst the noise is less on the Poco F1, if you look at my t-shirt and the white areas of it, they've almost all completely disappeared. All three phones have the option for selfie focus, essentially a selfie that you can take with portrait mode like background blur. Photos on the F1 and the Mi A2 are pretty much the same, but the OnePlus 6 has much sharper details on the face because of that beautification going on with the Xiaomi phones. You will also notice that the OnePlus 6 doesn't do a great job of keeping the whole hat in focus. It detects the top part of it because the colour is similar to the background as part of the background. And you'll see the same trend again here, where the top part of my cap, which is literally attached to my head right now, it treats as part of the background, whereas both Xiaomi phones manage to do it properly. When it comes to raw resolution, in terms of how much information you're actually capturing, the OnePlus 6 is a clear winner. With a 16 megapixel primary sensor compared to 12 on the other two phones, you just got that option of being able to zoom into your photos more and still having a sharp picture. Alright guys, a really interesting camera comparison, and in terms of raw bang for your buck, I would say the Pocophone F1 takes this one. What do you think? Alright, so big shout out to LastPass for sponsoring this video. I have talked about them before on a best apps video, so the fact that they wanted to sponsor some content is pretty much a win-win. For those of you who don't know, LastPass is a password manager, but much more than that. You create a master password which can then be used to access not just every password you have for every site, but also all of your personal details. So LastPass essentially takes all this and then uses it to fill in online forms for you. So say you're shopping online and you're about to check out, instead of manually filling in all your forms and your card details, your address, you just log into LastPass and it'll be done for you. So head over to lastpass.com, link is in the description below, or check out the Android or iOS applications. Thanks a lot for watching guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you guys next time.